Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from ejsllc.com. It's been a while since I made a video, but I've been pretty busy with planning a relocation and just simply haven't had the time. But I did want to make one today because it's directly related to some work that I'm doing with my RHCE prep and doing some things with Ansible. This particular video, though, is going to be about creating storage for your KVM VMs. So I'm not going to actually be using Ansible in this, but rather showing you how I will make the hard drives that I'll use when I'm practicing Ansible modules such as parted for creating partitions and such using Ansible. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as want to invite everyone, if you enjoy the video, make sure you click like and share it with others. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you ring that bell, or rather click the subscribe button and then ring the bell so you can be aware of when new content comes available. So I have two terminal windows open here. One is to my KVM host, the other is to a VM that's my Ansible control node. Again, we aren't going to be doing anything with actual Ansible. We're just working on the actual host as far as doing stuff with storage, but I want to have this VM here to where we can verify the things that we're doing on the host actually work. Now, you can easily make the storage devices using the virt manager GUI, and there is nothing wrong with doing it that way, but something I try to do as I'm learning something is to see if there's a way of doing it via the command line as well as the GUI, because if you can do it via the command line, then it can be scripted and potentially automated either through Ansible or through some other method of doing so. To be able to make our storage devices, there are a couple different ways of doing it. If you were to look at the Red Hat documentation for managing virtual machines and KVM and such, they're going to have you using the virsh commands, and then the other command we'll use is the qemu-img command. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. In fact, I actually learned how to do this with the qemu-img command first and then learn the virsh way later, but I figured I'd show both of them to you. So on the virsh side, what we're going to be doing is adding a volume to a storage pool. If I were to do virsh pool list, you're going to see the pools that I have available, and the pool that I'm going to be putting my disks into, or rather the files that will be representative of the block storage devices that I'll be attaching to a VM, I'm going to put them in the VM pool. So to do this, I'm actually going to use vol create as. If I were to do virsh -- help real quick, we see there's a couple of different ways of doing the volume create. The reason why I'm doing as is because I want to feed this the individual parameters and such as I'm doing the command. But if you wanted to make an XML file that has all of the details and other things, you can use the other commands as well. So we'll do virsh and vol create as. The pool that we're going to be using is the VM pool. The name of the volume, we're just going to call it Ansible test.qcal2. The format that we're going to be using is qcal2. Now you can use other formats and such. I typically always use qcal2. I know that it has a little bit more flexibility than the img and raw formats and such, but I don't have a real good technical reason for why I'm using qcal2 other than it's what I've always used with my lab. And then capacity, we're going to make this 1 gigabyte. It says that it has been created. What this actually means is if I were to ls into my KVM VM directory, which is what that pool is looking at, we'll see that we have this file here, which is the storage device that we're going to be using. So the next thing we have to do is attach this to our Ansible VM. So to do that, we will do virsh attach disk, give it the domain name. You don't have to do -- domain. Did I spell that right? Yeah. But I tend to, just as a matter of habit. We're just going to attach this to the first of my Ansible VMs. The source, I've always had to do the full path to it. You may be able to do this without the full path. For me, it always fails, but we'll do Ansible test. And for driver, I'm actually going to say subdriver. When I chose driver as qcal2, it never did work right for me. Like the VM would be able to see the block device, but it only showed just like the actual file size of it rather than the amount of storage that I'm actually wanting to present to the VM. So I had to start using subdriver, and that tends to work. I don't know the technical details of why that is. At some point I might dive into that and learn, but just my experience with my lab here, I'm having to use the subdriver qcal2. And then lastly, we need to give it a target, and this is going to be VDB. The current disk that is on the VM is using VDA, so we'll do VDB. And it complained. Let's see, target VDB duplicated for disk sources. I see. So this is going to make sense. I did some tests prior to making this video, and I clearly didn't clean up after myself. So let's just double check here. We're going to do virsh dom block list for Ansible client 1. Yep, and I still have VDB from one of my other tests. So we'll go in a little bit reverse order. If we wanted to remove a disk, we can do detach disk, give it our domain name. If any of you are new to KVM, the names of VMs are referred to as domains, and we'll do target VDB. So that should, famous last words in IT, right? Get rid of the disk. We can list our block list again, see that it's gone, and I'm just going to press up to get back to the other command. And now it has attached successfully. So put this into practice, or rather to verify that it's actually here. Let us SSH Ansible client 1. So we're now in here, and we'll do a listing of block devices. And we see our VDB is here with 1 gigabyte of storage. Now, if I were to do that detach disk again, give that just a moment to run, and then do our ls block again, we see that VDB is gone. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this VM is already running, which we'll talk about that in just a minute or so. That was a gotcha that I found with my learning of how to do this. We're going to attach the disk again. Should be there, and it is. And now we're going to reboot this VM. I want to see if this persists, because let's say you had to do this on some type of Red Hat exam, and when you do stuff on Red Hat exams, any of you that have done one of the Red Hat exams, you have to make sure everything survives a reboot. So I'm just curious to see if this will. Of course, I need the sudo for that. That'll take just a moment to reboot. While it's rebooting, let's take a look at the block list. Still there for the block list. So SSH eddy at Ansible client 1. And it is still there. So that does survive a reboot, which would make sense because if the block list is still showing that. One other thing I want to check is the actual XML for the VM. So we'll do virsh dump XML Ansible client 1. And I'm going to pipe that to less. What I'm looking for are the disks. Yep, and we see we have one disk that's Ansible client 1, and then another disk that's Ansible client 2. So that's definitely going to survive reboot, such as if I were to actually reboot my host, then this is going to make it. The one gotcha that I want to show you is when a VM is powered down. So what we're going to do is go ahead and detach this disk. And now I'm going to shut down the VM. And if I were to do virsh list all grep Ansible, we see the Ansible client 1 is shut off. So if I were to try to do the exact same command to attach the disk, so attach disk domain Ansible client 1, source would be KVM VM Ansible test, and subdriver qcal2, and the target's VDB, is going to complain that it's not running. So to get around this, what you have to do is the -- persistent. flag, and that will go ahead and attach the disk. And then once you run your VM, the disk will be there. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is when you do create volumes using virsh, if you wanted to get rid of this volume, what we really need to do is we would use virsh and vol delete, or vol del. I think no, it's vol delete, pool VM, and then the actual volume name is going to be Ansible test, and then it will delete it. You can just delete the file, but what I've found when you just delete the file, like virsh still thinks that the volume is there, so you need to go through these steps for it. The second way I wanted to show you was using the qemu-img tool. So it's going to be very similar, but we would do, let's say we want to make a 2 GB volume this time. So qemu-img, we'll do create, and then the file name, so that'll be kvm vm ansible test 2 qcal2 -f for format. I want to use qcal2, and then we just give it a number, so we'll do 2G for 2 gigs, and it will create the file. Now, one thing to note, if I were to do virsh vol list pool VM, we're not going to see that there, because from virsh's perspective, it doesn't know about this disk. Now, you can still attach it to your VM, and we'll have to use the persistent because the VM is currently off, but I could do virsh attach disk, domain Ansible client 1 source KVM VM Ansible test2.qcal subdriver, and then target VDB, and then persistent. Oh wait, VDB already exists. We'll just do VDC just to make this a little bit easier. And the disk is going to attach. So as far as which command to use, I know I said it in the beginning, it doesn't matter which, but I think, kind of thinking through this as I've made the video, I'm probably going to use the virsh commands going forward, just because it kind of ties into the system of storage pools and volumes and such, versus the qemu-img. There's nothing wrong with using qemu-img. It works as I've shown here, though I am curious if my VM would boot. So it has target VDB, but the disk isn't there. So I'm just curious to see if the VM will start now. A little bit outside of the scope of the video, but if you're watching this and you're a geek like me, sometimes it's kind of neat to try stuff and see what happens. So we'll do this real quick. Yeah, all right, it failed, which makes sense because it's trying to get to that storage file and it can't. So let us go ahead and detach VDB, just so I can give you proof positive that attaching the disk made with qemu-img does actually work. So Ansible client 1 target VDB. virsh is obviously not a command, but virsh is. There we go, had to add the persistent flag. So now we should be able to start Ansible client 1. And in just a moment, I should be able to SSH into that. There we go, now we're in. And ls block. That's curious, it put it on VDB, even though I had target VDC. Huh, unexpected, but the disk is there and it is a 2 GB disk. So hopefully this was useful for you as far as seeing how to make basic disks via the command line for your KVM environment. As always, if you enjoyed the content of the video, make sure you click like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Feel free to leave comments, either ask me questions, I'll answer as I have both ability and availability to answer, and also feel free to share this with others if you think it would benefit them in some way, either just learning about Linux or having some fun in their KVM environment. Again, I want to thank subscribers for watching another video, and to everyone, I will see you the next time.